Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Buy Yourself Flowers Project podcast. I'm here today with Elly Hanson. She is a writer and independent researcher and the research director of Fully Human. In her recent article, Taking Liberties, Confronting Big Tech's False Freedoms, she examines how algorithmic systems shape autonomy, attention, and identity, particularly for young people growing up within them. Okay, so let's get straight into the questions. First of all, in your article, you describe big tech's version of freedom as a kind of illusion. What do you think is the most difficult truth about digital freedom that people are reluctant to confront?
I love us diving in with the million-dollar question here. And thank you so much for having me on this brilliant podcast, Sabrina. Um, so yes, I think if I kind of go big picture with this one, um, although we love to kind of hate big tech, we've also been quite susceptible to the way in which the tech bros and those of their ilk have narrated freedom. We often kind of and we see these debates around tech as kind of freedom versus protection and safety, and so when Elon Musk says, you know, you're seeking to censor freedom of speech on X, we might kind of accept the terms of his debate. I think we tend to think of threats to our freedom as taking the form of oppression and authoritarianism, so kind of surveillance governments and that kind of thing. Whereas the threat that I see within social media, within these platforms, is a threat that kind of comes up from below, a threat that comes in the form of manipulation. And I'd love to go into this in a bit more detail, but that's a threat to freedom that we are not very good at seeing and understanding. And so when the tech bros say, we're here to support freedom of speech, we kind of tend to buy that rather than recognizing that they are potentially the biggest contemporary threat to our freedom. Um, I see there being kind of three major broad brushstroke threats to freedom. One is oppression and coercion. Then you've got manipulation, which is what's going on these platforms. And then you've got where there's no support for freedom, where there are vacuums. And I would argue that big tech is kind of actually undermining our freedom in all three of these ways, but particularly by being manipulative with how its algorithms work.
Thank you. I think you've really touched on an important issue here that leads right on to my next question, which is, you know, these platforms are designed to make users feel as if they have this autonomy. And how do you think that is produced? So again, it's touching on those three categories you mentioned and the manipulation. And where does this freedom begin to blur into kind of a guidance or a control even?
Yeah, and what's tricky is that some of this is quite complex, but it's so important that we do get our heads around it, in terms of the grand project to reclaim our freedom. Freedom is a core human need. So if I go off on a tangent here, but it's important. Human autonomy, I'm a psychologist, and psychologists have long looked at kind of what gives rise to human flourishing, what makes us tick, what gives us satisfaction, and human autonomy is absolutely core to that. And what do I mean? Like being in the driving seat of your life, owning your decisions, your values. This isn't some kind of, I'm not talking about individualism, or being just kind of selfish. Actually, we talk about relational autonomy, which is, I own my relationships, I own my commitment to those that I love. So this is a really core human need. Um, and what's happening with the algorithms is that, as you say, we might have a kind of feeling of choice and control. We're being shown things on our feeds that we might think, oh, yeah, that's interesting. I'll click on to that. But there is a lot of choice that's not our choice that is being made behind the scenes. So, in a complete nutshell, and apologies if some listeners are familiar with this, but a huge amount of data is being gathered about us the whole time. And we're not usually aware of exactly how much data that is, but it's, microseconds. Everything that we do online is being looked at and gathered up. And not just about us as individuals, but also about our demographic, like people like us. And then that is being used to fuel what's called engagement-based algorithms. Engagement here is really quite a murky term, because we might think engagement, oh, that's the things that interest me. But actually, no, it's the things that keep you trapped, that start to build a kind of addiction and dependency. So it's the things that trigger our impulses, quite primal parts of us, perhaps. It's things that turn our heads. So, if you're walking down the street and somebody says something shocking, or somebody is dressed in a very sexualized way, your head turns. That's how these algorithms work. It's like what will turn your head, and then we use that data on what turns your head to hook you in. Now, what turns our head is not actually our deepest choice, is it? That's not us acting in line with our deepest intentions. And what this means is that social media really platforms and serves people who are adept at at triggering those knee-jerk reactions, at triggering the head-turning actions. So it has made famous people that otherwise wouldn't have had much attention. They wouldn't have got anywhere, to be honest. And these are often people who are the ones who are pretty callous and willing to discard the truth and nuance in favor of whatever will get them attention. And it's usually through kind of outrage. We've got the word of the year, rage baiting. Well, that is a business model now. Rage baiting is a business model. Andrew Tate said it best. You want 50 to 60% likes, 30 to 40% hate. We want argument. We want war. And that is key, that you actually say things that who cares if they're true or not? It's about getting that attention, getting that outrage. Yeah, I could go on, but I'll stop
Yeah,
there.
please do. I think this is really interesting. I think um, a main part of, or at least a really significant part of scrolling social media is then the next day for someone like myself at school to talk to my friends about what's online and think, oh, what did you think about this? What did you think about that? And I think that's part of the engagement, is that argument. So that is absolutely a fundamental part to it. And I'd love to hear more, honestly.
Well, on that note, then, I've been trying to kind of think of metaphors that describe a bit of what's going on, and I've landed on this one of the town square with megaphones. So follow me here. Um, Imagine you've got a town square, and it's where people gather to have, discussions of the day. But we've got a kind of strange mayor to this town who's got a strange set of rules. So, basically, you're in the town square, you're all having a chat. Whoever manages to turn another person's head because of something they've said that's shocking or sexual or hateful or whatever it might be, they get given a megaphone. And so they start shouting from the megaphone because they've managed to turn some people's heads, so they've got the megaphone. Now, if anybody then, and you're never given a megaphone for speaking the truth, that's not a value in this town square at all. It's just if you've turned heads. And then if people start arguing with what you're saying from your megaphone, then you get given a bigger megaphone. So this puts the people in a very difficult situation, doesn't it? If somebody's shouting something really hateful, what do you do? Do you argue back because you disagree? But if you argue back, then you're just growing, you're increasing the sound of their voice. Um, and if we go back to Andrew Tate's comment, he said, "I want these haters." So a lot of people, when he was in his heyday, I now he's now obviously his status has diminished, but at the peak of his power, a lot of people really hated what he was saying and would really kind of get involved in that debate to shout him down. But if you take a step back from that, by engaging in that debate with him online, you are fueling him, you are giving him a bigger megaphone. And that is the pernicious evil to these algorithms, really. And that's why we have such, you know, successful hatefluencers.
Yeah, right.
Another good example right now, Andrew Tate's waned, but at the moment you've got people like Bonnie Blue. And Bonnie Blue actually acknowledges that she says very hateful things about women because she will get more hits.
Yeah.
So, it's just pretty depressing to be in this place where truth and nuance and construct, our core values that most of us hold around kindness and respect, they are not being rewarded by the algorithms, quite the opposite.
Wow. I think understanding that really underpins, all of these behaviors. And I think it's really important to understand that. As a social media user myself, it really, changes my perspective of things. What does growing up inside algorithmically shaped digital systems do to how young people understand themselves, particularly in terms of confidence, self-worth, and identity?
Another big question. Love them. Yeah, and obviously there is nuance here, and I'm not coming in and just saying, social media is all bad and everybody has to get off it. There really is nuance, and we'll no doubt come on to talk about how we kind of build resilience and navigate all of this in a healthy way. But that's not. But at the same time, yes, social media does carry risks with it. If you look at the kind of research surveys, many young people and adults and older people are describing themselves feeling quite kind of dependent and addicted. At its heart, there's this kind of false promise. Mark Zuckerberg will wax lyrical about how his platforms promote connection and freedom and opportunity. But it's this with social media, there's this feeling of, oh, this is my way to be connected. This is my way to have friends and meet all of these kind of core human needs. But it's a false promise. We kind of feel like it's doing that, but at the same time, it's undercutting it. So why do we have a loneliness epidemic? Um, Social media will be playing quite a big part in that. It's kind of promising connection without delivering it. And interestingly, that is actually what you see across a whole lot of other addictions, with drugs, etc. There's this disconnect with what you think, what something's promised you, and what actually you are left in the long run experiencing. So it's playing a role in increasing loneliness and alienation and disconnection. And we also know that, if we go back to the head turning nature of this and what triggers, rather than these being engagement based algorithms, I would describe them as manipulation based or impulse trigger based. So, one of the key things that they look to trigger is our insecurities. And if you're growing up, well, adolescence is a vulnerable time when you're working out who you are and how you feel about yourself and how do others feel about me. So there are all of the, I mean, these insecurities continue across the entirety of the life course, but they're particularly acute often as we're growing up. And, we've got it on record, Facebook, but it's true of others as well. But Meta has talked quite knowingly about, we know when teenagers feel lonely or depressed or worthless, and we will target content to them to profit from those feelings. If, for example, if a teenage girl deletes a selfie, that might be a good time to send her a beauty product ad. And when you really think about that, it's so sinister. We are profiting from her insecurity, and not just profiting from it, but driving it deeper, looking to ferment it, looking to find it, grow it, profit from it, and continue that spiral.
Wow. So my next question was supposed to be, many platforms acknowledge the emotional effects that they have on young people, and what changes do they make, and what claims do they say that they're making, but in reality they're not. But in all honesty, it seems the opposite. So is that even the case, that these platforms acknowledge the negative behaviors they're producing and try to stop them, or is it really truly just that vicious cycle of growing and nurturing the negative behaviors?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The conclusion I've come to is that a lot of that PR is gaslighting. And I didn't start with that conclusion. I like to believe the best of people. I was pretty hopeful when they started saying the right things. But we've just yet to see that translate into any substantive change to what's coming up on people's feeds. I mean, for example, Meta announced that they had now got Instagram teen accounts, but the research looking at those teen feeds, it's not suggesting that they're any better. In fact, they one one organization had young adults kind of setting up these teen accounts, and they were then asked, like, what did you see? And they were saying, oh my goodness, I would absolutely have hated to be a teen getting this stuff. I mean, they probably were getting that stuff as a teen as well, but like they couldn't believe that this was judged by Meta as suitable for a teen account. So if we go back to our town square, what they're basically doing now is if somebody's megaphone gets really loud and they're getting really, really hateful or whatever it is, really, really sexualized or really, really triggering of all of these insecurities, and they're encouraging suicide or these kind of quite extremes, finally they'll take away the megaphone. The real extreme hatefluences, etc., they'll take away your megaphone. But that doesn't stop the whole system of who you give megaphones to in the first place. And what that has meant is that, again, let's take the example of online misogyny and Andrew Tate. He's so bad that he's barred. Yeah. But what about all of the other content that by itself you couldn't go, oh, that's misogynistic? So let's take the example of these memes that portray girls and women as gold diggers. You know, um, you've got this little video where a guy tries to chat up a girl, she's not interested, then she suddenly sees that he's got a Lamborghini and she's all over him. That by itself, you can't say that's misogynistic. You just look at it, you just think, oh, okay, that's just this little kind of drama clip somebody's produced. But it's breadcrumbing, and as it's part of a pattern, those that suggest that girls and women are not to be trusted, and that's contributing to antagonism between the genders that I think has increased from, say, if we go back 15 years. Um, and as I say, the algorithm is promoting that kind of a content that isn't necessarily the extreme where we ban the megaphone, but it's just quite pervasive and it's everywhere, if that makes any sense. So to come back to your question, yes, they're taking away the rights of the most extreme people, not the rights, yeah, their freedom online, but they haven't changed the business model. And so what me and many other people are arguing for is safety by design, which means you change the algorithms. They need to stop being manipulation based and start being intentionality based.
Thank you for that. What do you think that kind of algorithm would look like? And first of all, would that be feasible? How would this affect young people if safety was built by design?
Yeah, and there's a lot of work to be done, there's a lot of things to be explored here. But what we can say is that not all platforms are as manipulation based as others. Most social media algorithms, or if not all, will have an element of engagement based, what's interesting to somebody. And I'm not against it at all, in all it's just that it shouldn't be extreme, and some platforms have other features that really work again to be trigger and impulse based. So you just bring in other considerations. The algorithm starts to consider things like truth. Now I know that's controversial. What is truth? But there are ways in which it can start to make those judgment calls, and just to kind of gain a sense of whether somebody's saying something discriminatory, etc. But also it can be asking its users more regularly, what does interest you? What kind of content would you like to see? Yes, I know that when you join platforms, they often ask you this, but it's quite cursory. And I don't think a lot of the algorithm is actually based on what you say. It's much more based on, again, what's triggering you, what are you hovering over for a millisecond longer than something else. These algorithms can also move to become more connection based. So if you take something like LinkedIn, LinkedIn is another social media platform, um, and it's much more connection based. So who do you know? Um, Actually, what you see on your feed is more about that than what's going to trigger you. So there's just nuance here and a direction of shift.
Thank you. Moving back to the social media that we have today, what do you think are practical measures that young people like myself can take, to kind of minimize the negative effect that social media has on mental well-being?
Yes, it's a really important thing to be thinking about. And I think there's a lot to be said for just practicing that muscle, growing that muscle of self-reflection, wider reflection, and intentionality, like kind of thinking deeply, what are my values? what are my goals in life? What does actually make me happy and give me a sense of contentment or connection or satisfaction? Um, like doing that deeper thinking, I think is really critical and really powerful. And then making decisions on the back of that. And I'm not saying that this is easy because it isn't, and we all struggle with it. But if you've done that kind of thinking, then that might lead some people to think, well, you know what, actually, I'm on X, but when I've spent half an hour on X, I don't feel great afterwards. And it is a false promise. I'm going to delete my X account. And so once you've done that thinking, then making some big decisions. Actually, do I need to be on all of these channels and platforms? Maybe not. And the ones that I decide to remain on, how am I going to um, navigate them? And that kind of critical thinking about what I see and why I see it. That's really important. And then I think there's another thing around talking to your friends and peers about this, because what we're talking about today still isn't widely understood. And fundamentally, this is a kind of collective action problem. We can each make our own individual changes, but if no one else around us is, then that becomes much harder and we're still impacted. Even if we stopped using social media, if all of our friends are using it, then that is shaping the topics, that is shaping the values and the culture, isn't it? So
Yeah.
it's kind of having that discussion with friends and, if possible, making a collective decision together. Well, let's not use this platform, let's use this one, or whatever it might be.
What will lead people to do this deeper thinking that is essential if they are really, addicted?
Yes, it's tricky, isn't it? And I don't have any easy answers. I mean, fundamentally, I'm campaigning for systemic change with the companies that play, the responsibility for this lies with them, and with governments and regulators that need to hold them to account. So that's, to be honest, that can be a direction of travel for all of us that, join the fight. Um, there are lots of movements that are starting up in this ongoing battle with big tech, to be honest. So that's a kind of good, but it's difficult though, because a lot of these collective organizing has to happen through social media. So, it's the waters in which we swim, and it's very difficult. Um, if somebody is pretty addicted, then it becomes harder. Like you say, I think habitual beings is a really important point. It's like we kind of have built a groove in our brain that's just very easy to travel down. And so when you're trying to build new pathways, new neural pathways, that is going to be really tough. So there's something around making it easier for yourself, putting in place boundaries. For example, you might want to have a screen time limit that you've set. Um, or, like I say, I'm actually going to delete this app because I find myself always falling into using it and it's not great for me. Or an agreement with a friend. So putting in place some kind of boundaries that help you to build those new pathways. And also, like, kind of looking beyond social media, like, what are the other things in life that I want to kind of go and discover and explore, that I might have been neglecting, like sport or um, drama or whatever it might be, like just going outside, joining your friends in the park. Like, are there other parts to life, that board games, that I haven't actually been discovering and could give some time to?
Yeah.
And the more time you do that, then the more that these new pathways are being built, and the easier it gets.
Yeah, I think something that links nicely to that is this quote that I discovered recently that's you should create more than you consume. And I thought that directly kind of links to, spend less time scrolling and, you know, board games, sport, or real, fostering real connection with people that you
Yeah.
are around. I think that's the key, as well as the deeper thinking that people should do about their actions, especially on social media.
Such a good point. You're right. It's the deep thinking, but then it's the actual acting, isn't it? And this is not just a negative thing. Oh, I've got to control something that I'm falling into. It's like, actually, if I don't want to do that, what do I want to be doing? Or what could I be exploring and finding out about? And then it becomes something much more exciting and fulfilling, doesn't it? And
Mm,
I love that quote that you mentioned. Like, and if we think of the word create, it's also connected to the word kind of give, isn't it? Because so much of tech ends up being about us kind of couch potatoes consuming. Um, and what we often don't recognize in that is that that actually means that we're not giving to other people. And the irony in life is the more you give to others, that's actually fulfilling yourself as well anyway. So it's kind of like, let's get out and about. And if you start with that question, like, how can I give to others? How can I enrich their lives? Then a lot of your own life satisfaction will flow from that too.
Thank you. Do you think that I think that's a good premise, the fact that, giving is also a self-fulfillment kind of prophecy. Do you think that social media makes teens maybe more selfish as the algorithm is tuned to their own desires or even insecurities? If this is a very personalized platform, do you think that also produces negative kind of behaviors such as not being inclined to give as much?
It's a really good question. And certainly you see, like a lot of the content, a lot of what's being pushed is inviting us all. But as you say, it might be even more of a problem for younger people in the process of kind of working out what are my values, what do I think, what is my identity. It's pushing a lot of content that's very consumerist, and that's maybe against our core values of kindness and respect. It's so interesting when you look at the research because that finds that the vast majority of us, what's most important to us are these things like being compassionate and respecting others and love and looking after our planet. And yet, as we go, well, when you're a child, you have those values and you tend to think that other people share them. What's really sad from this research is that as you're going to go through your teenage years, you might still have those values, but you start thinking that other people don't have them and that they're more caught up with things like wealth and status and attractiveness. And, I believe that social media is playing a part in that. And if we think that, everybody else is quite consumerist, then we're potentially going to slip into that too. So, yeah, I think it is shaping us away from listening to our core values. Fundamentally, the whole thing is being governed by people who are seeking to shape us towards their profit. And they are served by shaping us into consumerists and into people who, engage in sexual objectification and all of these things. They want to shape us into things that spend money and see through, and are hyper capitalist fundamentally.
Wow. Yeah. I think you've touched on the key issues, but also, you've touched on ways that teens and people generally can um, escape the system. So I think that's really informative. And I think spreading this is really important to teens because some people are, they may not even be aware of what's going on. And I think that's really important to spread that.
Yes. And how we think about this fund, this is what this is all about, really. Like, reclaim your freedom. That's my main message here. Take back control. These phrases have often been used, but not in the right, way. Actually, this is about your autonomy, your right to author your own life in line with your core values and your best interests and those of those around you. So this is an existential um, situation and something that we, must take seriously.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I really have enjoyed having you on today and exploring these issues.
Been
Um,
a real privilege talking to you, Sabrina. Thanks so much.